December 1142. A woman wraps herself in a white cloak, gets lowered from the walls of Oxford Castle by rope in complete darkness, walks across a frozen river on foot, and travels 6 miles through enemy territory in the snow. Earlier, she had escaped a different castle disguised as a corpse, carried out on a funeral bier through enemy lines while soldiers searched everywhere for her. Her name was Empress Matilda. She spent 19 years fighting a civil war for the English throne. Every English monarch since has descended from her bloodline, and almost nobody today remembers her name. This is what life as a medieval princess actually looked like, and it looked nothing like what most people imagine. We all carry the same image in our heads: a beautiful woman in a tower, brushing her hair, waiting for a prince. The dress is always stunning. The hair is always clean. One part of that image does hold up against history, and it is the towers, because princesses were genuinely locked inside them, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. Eleanor of Aquitaine spent 16 years imprisoned by her own husband. Joanna of Castile spent 46 years, confined by first her father and then her son, who told the world she had lost her mind. The waiting was real, but nobody was coming to rescue any of them. Everything else about that image is a fabrication. Your morning begins at 5:30. The day opens with Mass in the castle chapel before moving into lessons. You are learning Latin, French, music, dancing, and household management. That last subject is the one that actually matters, because the real job you are being trained for from birth is running an estate of 100 to 150 people. That makes you less of a fairy tale princess and more of a chief executive, except you cannot choose the company. You cannot resign, and your future husband has already been selected for you before you were old enough to have an opinion about it. The education was more rigorous than most people assume. Catherine of Aragon, before she ever set foot in England, could speak fluent Latin and had studied the Bible, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, Seneca, civil law, and canon law. When she arrived as a teenager, she communicated entirely in Latin because nobody had bothered to teach her English, the language of the country she had been sent to help rule. That single fact tells you everything about what mattered in this arrangement. Your brother learned to fight. You learned to embroider and manage servants. And yet when your husband rode off to war, which he did frequently, you were the one left running the entire castle, its defenses, its finances, its staff, its food supply. You were expected to manage a military installation without ever having been taught how to defend one. Several princesses did exactly that and did it brilliantly, which makes the absence of military training feel less like an oversight and more like a deliberate crippling. Between the years 1000 and 1800, roughly 59,000 male scholars passed through European universities. The number of women was approximately 108. Those gates were not merely closed, they were bricked shut. None of that education mattered much in the calculations being made about your future, because what mattered was the diplomatic alliance your marriage could secure. You existed as a political asset with a pulse. Canon law fixed the minimum marriage age at 12 for girls, but royal families routinely ignored even that. Empress Matilda was married off at 8. Isabella of Valois married Richard II of England at the age of 6, with her dolls packed into the trousseau beside her. Common women in northwestern Europe typically married in their early to mid-20s. A princess followed entirely different mathematics. The younger you were, the more malleable you were, and the sooner you could begin producing heirs. Lady Margaret Beaufort makes that danger impossible to ignore. Married at 12, she gave birth at 13. Her delivery left her so physically damaged that she never conceived again. Her confessor later wrote that it seemed a miracle the child had been born at all. That child became Henry VII. Margaret went on to become the most powerful woman in England, founding 2 Cambridge colleges and engineering the entire Tudor dynasty. Decades later, when she personally objected to her granddaughter's early marriage and warned it could injure her and endanger her health. Those words came from a woman who knew exactly what early marriage had cost her. Now consider where you were actually living. Your fairy tale castle was, in practice, a military fortress that happened to contain bedrooms. Stone walls absorbed cold and never released it. Windows were narrow defensive slits designed to stop arrows, which also happened to stop sunlight. Dried reeds covered the stone floors and bred fleas, rats, and anything else that thrived in warm, dark spaces. The smell of unwashed bodies mixed with kitchen and stable odors, stench drifting from the toilets, and acrid smoke rolling off torches and candles, all of it hanging permanently in the air. Those toilets, called garderobes, were small stone chambers built into the castle walls with chutes that emptied directly into the moat below. The word garderobe translates to wardrobe because people hung their clothing inside the toilet shafts, where ammonia from urine killed fleas and moths. Your best dress lived in what amounted to a medieval urinal, and that counted as clever. The beauty standards you faced deserved their own moment. A high forehead was the number one beauty ideal, so women plucked or shaved their hairlines back and sometimes burned the follicles with hot pins to prevent regrowth. Eyebrows were removed entirely. Over-plucking led to false eyebrows, crafted from mouse fur, glued directly to the face. Pale skin was achieved through ceruse, a mixture of white lead powder and vinegar applied directly to the face, which over time caused skin eruptions, tooth loss, paralysis, and death. That was the accepted trade-off. Belladonna eye drops dilated the pupils for an alluring look and also caused blurred vision and sometimes permanent blindness. Looking beautiful and slowly dying were, in medieval Europe, essentially the same pursuit. Now we arrive at the part that actually killed you. The maternal mortality rate ran at approximately 1 in 100 per birth. That number only looks survivable until you consider how many births a noblewoman actually faced. Wet nurses enabled conception within months of delivery, meaning a fertile noblewoman might produce 8 to 15 children across her reproductive life. The lifetime risk worked out to approximately 1 in 18. If you gathered 18 women in a room, one of them would die doing this. That rate was 50 to 100 times higher than today. Eleanor of Castile bore 16 children over 25 years of marriage, including while traveling to the Holy Land on crusade. 10 of those 16 children died before reaching adulthood. Before 1750, aristocratic infant mortality actually exceeded that of commoners. Noble women did not breastfeed, which meant they could conceive again almost immediately, and those rapid repeat pregnancies proved dangerous for both mother and child. The privilege itself became the killer. Pain relief during labor was largely forbidden, based on biblical teaching that women should bring forth children in suffering. Spiritual aids took the place of medicine. Prayers to saints, birthing girdles wrapped around the belly, and sympathetic magic like opening cupboard doors and untying knots throughout the room. The leading killer after delivery was puerperal fever, a bacterial infection with no understanding of germ theory to prevent its spread. Midwives moved from patient to patient without washing their hands. Jane Seymour died 12 days after delivering the future Edward VI. Plague did not spare the highborn either. Joan of England, daughter of Edward III, died of plague in Bordeaux in 1348 while traveling to her own wedding. She was 14 years old. Wealth could buy a nicer room to die in. It could not buy immunity. You might assume, given all of this, that medieval princesses were simply victims trapped inside a system designed to use them up and discard them. The ideological framework was explicit. Women were considered the only imperfection in God's creation. Every husband held the legal right to enforce obedience however he saw fit. The church's great contribution was to limit the length of the rod a husband could use. Not to ban it, just to limit it. But calling these women victims gets the story completely wrong. Eleanor of Aquitaine served as Queen of France and then Queen of England, traveled on the Second Crusade, and bore 10 children. When her sons revolted against Henry II, she backed the rebellion and attempted to flee in men's clothing, only to be captured and imprisoned for 16 years by her own husband. After Henry died, she stepped into the role of regent at nearly 70. When Richard was captured returning from the Crusades, she raised 150,000 marks for his ransom. At nearly 80 years old, she crossed the Pyrenees in winter to personally fetch a bride for her grandson. She lived to 82 in the 12th century, when most people did not see 50. Anna Komnena, a Byzantine princess born in 1083, had a failed coup confine her to a monastery for 35 years. She used that time to write the Alexiad, a 15-book epic history of the First Crusade. It remains the only account of the Crusades from the Byzantine perspective, and the first complete history written by a woman anywhere in the world. She did not escape her tower. She built something permanent inside it. Ingeborg of Denmark married Philip II of France in 1193. The very next morning, Philip declared he could not stand her and demanded an annulment. When she received the news, Ingeborg screamed in Latin, Mala Francia, Roma, Roma, bad France, to Rome, to Rome. She fought that annulment for 20 years, refusing to accept it while Philip imprisoned her in increasingly harsh conditions. She outlived him. Christine de Pizan, writing in 1405 as the first professional female author in European history, was exhausted from hearing that women were weak, fickle, and easily deceived. Her response was this: if women are so flighty and inconstant as some clerks would have us believe, why is it that their suitors have to resort to such trickery to have their way with them? There is no need to go to war for a castle that is already captured. 600 years later, the defiance in that sentence still lands exactly as she intended. These women were imprisoned by their own families, declared insane for political convenience, and denied the thrones they legally held. They still managed to found dynasties, command armies, write histories, and redraw the map of Europe. The fairy tale version of a medieval princess waits in a tower for rescue. The real version breaks out of the tower dressed as a corpse, crosses a frozen river at midnight in a white cloak, spends 20 years writing furious letters to the Pope, or builds a history inside a monastery that survives for 1,000 years. What the fairy tale gets most wrong is not the suffering. It is the strength. These women did not wait to be rescued. They rescued themselves, shaped the world around them, and did all of it inside a system that told them every single day they were the only imperfection in God's creation. And through all of it, not a single glass slipper ever appeared